Chapter 1. In the beginning. A long time ago, before the world existed, there was only darkness. No light, no land, no sky, just emptiness. But then, something incredible happened. God spoke. "Let there be light," he said. And suddenly, light appeared, bright and shining. The darkness was no longer alone. God separated the light from the darkness. He called the light day, and the darkness night. It was the first day. The next day, God created the sky, wide and endless, stretching above the waters. The sky was beautiful and blue. This was the second day. On the third day, God gathered the waters into seas and made dry land appear. He called the dry land earth, and the waters seas. Then he made plants of every kind, tall trees, colorful flowers, and green grass. The earth was full of life. On the fourth day, God created the sun to shine during the day and the moon and stars to glow at night. The sun was warm and bright, and the moon shone softly in the dark sky. The fifth day was special. God filled the sky with birds, eagles, doves, and sparrows. He filled the seas with fish, big and small, swimming through the deep waters. Everything was alive and moving. Then came the sixth day. God created animals to walk on the earth: lions, elephants, horses, and tiny ants. But his greatest creation was still to come. He made humans, a man and a woman, in his own image. He gave them life and blessed them, telling them to care for the world. Finally, on the seventh day, God rested. He saw everything he had made, and it was very good. The world was full of beauty and life. This was the beginning of everything. Chapter 2. A beautiful garden. After creating the world, God made a special place. It was called the Garden of Eden. This garden was beautiful and full of life. The trees were tall and strong. Their leaves were green and fresh. There were flowers of every color, filling the air with a sweet smell. Rivers flowed gently, making the land rich and healthy. The sun shone warmly, and the birds sang happily in the trees. In the middle of the garden, God placed two special trees. One was the tree of life. The other was the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Then God made the first man. His name was Adam. God took dust from the ground, shaped it, and breathed life into him. Adam opened his eyes and saw the beautiful world around him. God gave him the garden to live in and take care of. Adam named the animals: lions, elephants, birds, and even tiny insects. But there was no one like him. He was alone. God saw this and said, "It is not good for man to be alone. I will make a helper for him." So while Adam was sleeping, God took one of his ribs and made a woman. Her name was Eve. When Adam saw her, he was happy. Now he was not alone. God blessed them and said, "Be fruitful and increase in number. Take care of the earth and everything in it." Adam and Eve lived in the Garden of Eden, where everything was perfect. They walked with God, and they had everything they needed. But in the garden there was also a test, a choice. Would they listen to God, or would they choose their own way? Chapter 3. The Test in the Garden. Adam and Eve lived happily in the Garden of Eden. They had everything they needed. The fruit was sweet, the air was fresh, and they walked with God every day. But God had given them one rule. You may eat from any tree in the garden, he said, but do not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. If you eat from it, you will surely die. Adam and Eve listened. They enjoyed the garden and stayed away from the forbidden tree. But one day, a serpent appeared. It was more clever than any other animal. The serpent spoke to Eve. Did God really say you cannot eat from any tree? It asked. Eve shook her head. No, we can eat from any tree, except this one. If we eat from it, we will die. The serpent smiled. You will not die, it whispered. God knows that if you eat this fruit, your eyes will be opened. You will be like God. You will know good and evil. Eve looked at the fruit. It was beautiful and looked delicious. She wanted to be wise. She reached out, took the fruit, and ate it. Then she gave some to Adam, and he ate too. At that moment, everything changed. Their eyes were opened. They realized they were naked, and they felt ashamed. They quickly took fig leaves and covered themselves. Later, they heard God walking in the garden. But instead of running to him, they hid among the trees. Adam, where are you? God called. Adam stepped forward. I was afraid, so I hid. Did you eat from the tree I told you not to eat from? God asked. Adam pointed to Eve. She gave me the fruit, and I ate it. Eve pointed to the serpent. The serpent tricked me, and I ate. God was sad. Adam and Eve had disobeyed. Because of their choice, they could no longer stay in the garden. Life would now be difficult. There would be pain and suffering. But God still loved them. Before sending them out, he made clothes for them from animal skins. Then, Adam and Eve left the Garden of Eden and entered a new, unknown world. It was the first time they were truly alone. But even then, God had a plan to bring them back. Chapter 4. A New World. Adam and Eve stepped outside the Garden of Eden for the first time. The world was different. It was not like the beautiful garden they had left behind. The ground was rough, and the sun felt hotter. The trees did not grow as easily, and the rivers were not as peaceful. Life was now difficult. Adam worked hard to grow food. He dug the earth, planted seeds, and waited for them to grow. But weeds and thorns grew too, making his work painful. Eve also had challenges. When she gave birth to their first child, it was painful, but she was happy. She named him Cain. Later, she had another son, Abel. Their family was growing. As the boys grew, they became very different. Cain worked in the fields, growing crops, Abel took care of sheep. One day, Cain and Abel brought gifts to God. Abel gave his best sheep, while Cain brought some of his crops. God was pleased with Abel's offering, but not with Cain's. Cain was angry. His heart was full of jealousy. God spoke to Cain. "Why are you angry? If you do what is right, you will be accepted. But be careful, sin is waiting at your door. It wants to control you, but you must rule over it." Cain did not listen. One day, while they were in the field, Cain attacked Abel and killed him. God spoke to Cain. "Where is your brother?" Cain looked down. "I don't know," he said. "Am I my brother's keeper?" God's voice was sad. "What have you done? Your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground." Cain had to leave his family. He went far away and started a new life. But his heart was full of pain and regret. Adam and Eve were heartbroken. They had lost both of their sons. One was gone, and the other was dead. But God gave them another child. His name was Seth. Through him, God's promise would continue. Even though life was hard, God never left them. He had a plan for the future. Chapter 5: The world becomes evil. Many years passed, and the world was filled with more and more people. But as the world grew, so did wickedness. People became selfish, violent, and unkind. They stopped listening to God. God saw the earth and was saddened. People had turned away from him. They hurt each other and did what was wrong. Only one man still walked with God. His name was Noah. Noah was righteous. He obeyed God and lived a good life. God looked at Noah and made a plan to save him and his family. "Noah," God said, "I am going to send a great flood to cover the earth. But you must build an ark, a great boat. Bring your family and 2 of every kind of animal inside. You will be safe." Noah listened. He did everything just as God commanded. He gathered wood and built the ark. It was huge, big enough to hold his family and all the animals. People laughed at Noah. "Why are you building a boat? There is no flood," they mocked. But Noah kept working. He trusted God. Finally, the ark was ready. Noah led the animals inside: lions, elephants, birds, and even tiny insects. His family entered too. Then the sky grew dark. Raindrops began to fall. At first, they were small, but soon the rain became heavy. The earth shook as water burst from the ground. The great flood had begun. For 40 days and 40 nights, rain covered the earth. The waters rose higher and higher, covering even the tallest mountains. Everything outside the ark was lost. But inside, Noah and his family were safe. Then one day, the rain stopped. The waters slowly began to go down. After a long time, the ark came to rest on a mountain. Noah sent out a dove to see if the land was dry. The first time, it came back. The second time, it returned with an olive leaf. The third time, it did not come back at all. The earth was dry again. Noah and his family stepped out of the ark. The world was fresh and new. Noah built an altar and thanked God. God placed a rainbow in the sky. "This is my promise," he said. "Never again will I destroy the earth with a flood." The rainbow was a sign of God's love and faithfulness. Life on earth would begin again. Chapter 6. A fresh start. The flood was over. The world was quiet again. The sun shone brightly in the sky, and the land was fresh and clean. It was time for a new beginning. Noah and his family stepped out of the ark. They looked around at the empty land. Everything had been washed away, but God had given them a second chance. Noah built an altar and gave thanks to God. He offered a sacrifice, and God was pleased. God spoke to Noah and his family. "Be fruitful and increase in number. Fill the earth and take care of it." Then God made a promise. He placed a beautiful rainbow in the sky. "This is my sign," he said. "I will never again destroy the earth with a flood." The rainbow was a reminder of God's love and faithfulness. Noah's sons Shem, Ham, and Japheth began to build their families. Soon, many people spread across the land. They planted crops, raised animals, and built homes. But as time passed, some people forgot about God. They wanted to make a name for themselves. They had an idea. "Let's build a great tower," they said. "A tower so tall that it reaches the sky. Then we will be powerful, and we will not be scattered across the earth." This was not what God wanted. He had told them to fill the earth, not to stay in one place and build a tower for their own glory. God saw what they were doing. If they all spoke the same language, they could do anything. So he decided to stop them. One day, as the people were building the Tower of Babel, something strange happened. Suddenly, they could not understand each other. One worker spoke, but another could not understand him. Confusion spread everywhere. People argued, and the work stopped. Because they could no longer communicate, they separated and moved to different parts of the world. The great tower was never finished. This was how different languages began, and how people spread across the earth. God's plan was fulfilled, even when humans tried to do things their own way. Even though people made mistakes, God's love remained. He was still in control, and his plan for the world would continue. Chapter 7. A New Journey. Many years passed after the Tower of Babel. People spread across the earth, forming different nations. But many forgot about God. Then God chose a man. His name was Abram, later called Abraham. He lived in a city called Ur with his wife Sarai and his family. One day, God spoke to Abram. "Abram, leave your country, your people, and your father's house. Go to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation. I will bless you and make your name great. Through you, all the families of the earth will be blessed. Abram listened. He trusted God. Even though he did not know where he was going, he packed his things and left. He took his wife Sarai, his nephew Lot, and all their servants and animals. They traveled far, trusting in God's promise. When they arrived in Canaan, God spoke again. "This is the land I will give to your children." Abram built an altar and worshipped God. He thanked him for his promise. But there was a problem. Abram and Sarai were old, and they had no children. How could Abram's children become a great nation? One night, God took Abram outside. "Look up at the sky," he said. "Can you count the stars? Your children will be as many as the stars in the sky." Abram believed God's promise. Even though it seemed impossible, he had faith. God gave him a new name, Abraham, meaning father of many nations. And God made a covenant, a holy promise. "I will be your God, and you will be my people." Even though Abraham did not see the full promise in his lifetime, he trusted God's plan. This was the beginning of something great. Chapter 8. The Promise Fulfilled. Abraham and Sarah had waited a long time. God had promised them a child, but many years passed, and they were still childless. They were now very old. One day, God spoke to Abraham again. "Next year, Sarah will have a son." Sarah heard this and laughed. "How can I have a child when I am so old?" she thought. But God's promises never fail. The next year, Sarah gave birth to a baby boy. They named him Isaac, which means laughter, because Sarah had laughed when she heard God's promise. Abraham and Sarah were filled with joy. Isaac was the child God had promised. Through him, God would bless many nations. But then, God tested Abraham. One day, God said, "Abraham, take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love. Go to the mountain and offer him as a sacrifice." Abraham's heart was heavy, but he trusted God. He took Isaac and traveled to the mountain. Isaac carried the wood for the offering. "Father," Isaac asked, "where is the lamb for the sacrifice?" Abraham answered, "God will provide." When they reached the top, Abraham prepared the altar. Just as he was about to sacrifice Isaac, an angel called out, "Abraham, stop! Do not harm the boy. Now I know that you trust God completely." Abraham looked up and saw a ram caught in the bushes. God had provided a sacrifice. God blessed Abraham again. "Because you have obeyed me, I will make your descendants as many as the stars in the sky. Through your family, all nations will be blessed." Isaac lived, and God's promise continued. Abraham had trusted God, and God had kept his word. Chapter 9. A wife for Isaac. Isaac grew up to be a strong and kind man. Abraham, his father, was now very old. He wanted to find a good wife for Isaac, someone who loved God. One day, Abraham called his most trusted servant and said, "Go to my homeland. Find a wife for my son Isaac. Do not choose from the people here, but from my own family." The servant obeyed. He took 10 camels and traveled a long way to a city called Nahor. When he arrived, he stopped by a well outside the city. He prayed, "Lord, please show me the right woman for Isaac. If she gives me water and also gives water to my camels, I will know she is the one." Before he finished praying, a young woman named Rebekah came to the well. She carried a jar on her shoulder. The servant ran to her and asked, "Please, may I have some water?" Rebekah smiled and gave him a drink. Then she said, "I will also give water to your camels." The servant was amazed. This was a sign from God. He gave Rebekah gifts, gold, jewelry, and bracelets. Then he asked about her family. When he learned that she was from Abraham's relatives, he knew God had answered his prayer. Rebekah ran home to tell her family. Her brother, Laban, welcomed the servant. After hearing everything, her family agreed that Rebekah could marry Isaac. The next day, Rebekah left her home. She traveled with the servant to meet Isaac. When she saw him from a distance, she covered her face with a veil. Isaac welcomed her, and they were married. He loved her very much, and together, they began their life as husband and wife. God had led them to each other. This was just the beginning of a new family that God had promised to bless. Chapter 10. 2 brothers, 2 paths. Isaac and Rebekah were blessed with twin sons, Jacob and Esau. Even before they were born, they struggled inside Rebekah's womb. She asked God why this was happening. God answered, "2 nations are in your womb. The older will serve the younger." Esau was born first. He was strong and covered with red hair. Jacob was born right after him, holding Esau's heel. As they grew, they became very different. Esau loved to hunt and spend time outdoors. Jacob preferred staying at home, thinking and learning. One day, Esau came home from hunting. He was very hungry. Jacob had made a pot of stew. Esau said, "Give me some of that stew, I'm starving." Jacob looked at him and said, "First, sell me your birthright." A birthright was very important. It meant receiving the family's greatest blessings. But Esau was so hungry, he didn't care. "What good is my birthright if I die of hunger?" Esau said. He made a deal and ate the stew. Years later, Isaac became old and blind. He wanted to bless his firstborn, Esau. But Rebekah remembered God's words. The younger would be blessed. She told Jacob, "Go to your father. Pretend to be Esau and take the blessing." Jacob hesitated. "What if my father finds out?" Rebekah helped Jacob cover his arms with goat skin, so he would feel hairy like Esau. Then Jacob went to Isaac. "Father, it's me, Esau," he said. Isaac touched Jacob's arms. "You sound like Jacob, but you feel like Esau." Then Isaac gave Jacob the blessing meant for Esau. When Esau found out, he was furious. Jacob was afraid. Rebekah told him, "Run away to my brother's house. Stay there until Esau's anger is gone." Jacob left home, beginning a journey that would change his life forever. God had a plan for him. Chapter 11. A Stairway to Heaven. Jacob was running for his life. He had taken Esau's blessing, and now his brother was furious. His mother, Rebekah, told him to go to her brother Laban's house in Haran. Jacob traveled for many days. One night, as the sun set, he lay down on the ground, using a stone as a pillow. That night, he had a dream. In his dream, he saw a stairway reaching from the earth to heaven. Angels were going up and down the stairs. At the top stood God, who spoke to him. "I am the Lord, the God of your grandfather Abraham and your father Isaac. I am with you. I will give this land to you and your descendants. I will watch over you wherever you go, and I will bring you back to this land." When Jacob woke up, he was amazed. "Surely, God is in this place," he said. He took the stone he had used as a pillow and set it up as a pillar. He poured oil over it as an offering to God and named the place Bethel, which means house of God. Jacob made a vow. "If God will be with me and take care of me, I will serve him, and this place will be God's house." With a new heart and a new purpose, Jacob continued his journey, knowing that God was with him. Chapter 12. The trickster is tricked. Jacob arrived in Haran, tired but hopeful. He found his uncle Laban and began working for him. One day, Jacob saw a beautiful young woman named Rachel. She was Laban's daughter, and Jacob loved her. "Let me marry Rachel," Jacob said to Laban. "I will work for you for 7 years in exchange for her hand." Laban agreed, and Jacob worked hard for 7 years. But because he loved Rachel, the time passed quickly. Finally, the wedding day arrived. But Laban tricked Jacob. Instead of Rachel, he gave him Leah, Rachel's older sister. Jacob didn't realize until the next morning. Jacob was angry. "Why did you trick me?" he asked. Laban replied, "In our country, the older daughter must marry first. But if you work another 7 years, you can marry Rachel too." Jacob agreed. After 7 more years, he finally married Rachel. He loved her deeply, but now he had 2 wives, and life became complicated. God blessed Leah with many children, but Rachel had none. She prayed to God, and in time, he gave her a son, Joseph. After working for Laban for 20 years, Jacob wanted to return home. But Laban did not want him to leave because Jacob had become successful. So Jacob made a plan. One night, he gathered his family and all his flocks and secretly left. Laban chased after him, but God warned Laban in a dream not to harm Jacob. When they met, Jacob and Laban made a covenant, a promise to live in peace. Jacob was finally free. But he had one more challenge ahead, meeting his brother Esau again. Chapter 13. A Brother's Forgiveness. Jacob was returning home after many years. But there was one problem: his brother Esau. The last time they had seen each other, Esau was furious. He had wanted to kill Jacob for taking his blessing. Jacob was afraid. What if Esau was still angry? What if he wanted revenge? Jacob prayed to God, "Lord, please protect me. I am afraid of Esau." As he traveled, Jacob sent messengers ahead with gifts, goats, sheep, camels, and donkeys. "Tell Esau these are from his servant Jacob," he said. He hoped Esau would accept them. That night, something amazing happened. Jacob was alone, and a man appeared. They wrestled all night until dawn. The man touched Jacob's hip, and he was injured. Then the man said, "Let me go, for the sun is rising." But Jacob held on and said, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." The man looked at him and said, "Your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and men, and you have won." Jacob realized that he had wrestled with God himself. He called the place Peniel, meaning face of God. The next day, Jacob saw Esau coming with 400 men. He bowed down to the ground, showing respect. To his surprise, Esau ran to him and hugged him. "My brother, I have missed you," Esau said. He was not angry anymore. Instead, he had forgiven Jacob. Jacob was overjoyed. "Seeing your face is like seeing the face of God," he said. The two brothers made peace. Jacob knew that God had been with him all along. Chapter 14. A New Beginning in Canaan. Jacob and his family settled in Canaan, the land God had promised to his descendants. He had many children, and his household grew. But not everything was peaceful. One day, Jacob's daughter Dinah went to visit the women of the land. While she was there, something terrible happened. A prince named Shechem took her and treated her badly. Dinah's brothers were furious. Two of Jacob's sons, Simeon and Levi, decided to take revenge. They tricked the men of Shechem's city and later attacked them. Jacob was troubled. "You have made us enemies in this land," he said. "Now the people here will come against us." Jacob prayed, and God spoke to him. "Go to Bethel and build an altar there. I am with you." Jacob obeyed. Before leaving, he told his family, "Remove all foreign gods from among you. We must serve only the Lord." They gave him their idols and earrings, and Jacob buried them under a tree. As they traveled, God protected them. The surrounding cities did not attack them because God put fear in their hearts. When they arrived in Bethel, Jacob built an altar and worshipped God. Then, God appeared to him again. "Your name is no longer Jacob, but Israel," God said. "I will bless you and make you a great nation." Jacob's family continued their journey, but sorrow came. His wife Rachel gave birth to another son, Benjamin, but she died during childbirth. Jacob buried her and was heartbroken. Later, Jacob's father Isaac also passed away, and Esau and Jacob buried him together. Despite all the hardships, God was still with Jacob. His family was growing, and his promises were being fulfilled. Chapter 15. A Dream That Changed Everything. Jacob had many sons, but he loved Joseph the most. He gave Joseph a special robe of many colors, which made his brothers jealous. Joseph also had dreams. One night, he told his brothers, "In my dream, we were binding sheaves of grain in the field. My sheaf stood tall, and yours bowed down to mine." His brothers were angry. "Do you think you will rule over us?" they said. Joseph had another dream. "I saw the sun, moon, and 11 stars bowing down to me." Even his father, Jacob, was surprised. "Will your mother and I also bow before you?" His brothers hated him even more. One day, Joseph's brothers were tending sheep far from home. Jacob sent Joseph to check on them. When they saw him coming, they said, "Here comes the dreamer. Let's kill him and see what happens to his dreams." But his brother Reuben stopped them. "Let's not kill him," he said. Instead, they threw Joseph into a pit. Later, a group of traders passed by. The brothers sold Joseph to them for 20 pieces of silver. The traders took Joseph to Egypt. To hide what they had done, the brothers took Joseph's robe, dipped it in goat's blood, and showed it to their father. Jacob cried, "A wild animal must have killed my son." He was heartbroken. Meanwhile, Joseph arrived in Egypt. Though he had lost everything, God was still with him. Joseph's journey was just beginning. Chapter 16, From Slave to Leader. Joseph arrived in Egypt as a slave. He was sold to a man named Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh. Even though Joseph had lost everything, God was with him. Joseph worked hard, and Potiphar saw that he was trustworthy. He put Joseph in charge of his entire household. Everything Joseph touched was successful because God blessed him. But trouble came. Potiphar's wife lied about Joseph, and he was thrown into prison. Even in prison, God was still with him. The prison guard saw Joseph's honesty and put him in charge of the other prisoners. One day, two of Pharaoh's servants, the cupbearer and the baker, had dreamed. They were troubled because they didn't know what the dreams meant. Joseph said, "God can interpret dreams. Tell me what you saw." The cupbearer said, "In my dream, I saw a vine with 3 branches. The grapes grew, and I squeezed them into Pharaoh's cup." Joseph explained, "In 3 days, Pharaoh will restore you to your position." The baker then said, "In my dream, I had 3 baskets of bread on my head, but birds came and ate them." Joseph's face became serious. "In 3 days, Pharaoh will take your life." 3 days later, everything happened just as Joseph said. The cupbearer returned to Pharaoh's service, but the baker was executed. Before the cupbearer left, Joseph said, "Remember me when you are free. Speak to Pharaoh about me." But the cupbearer forgot about Joseph. 2 more years passed, and Joseph remained in prison. Even though he was forgotten by men, God had not forgotten him. His story was not over. Chapter 17, From Prison to Palace. 2 years had passed, and Joseph was still in prison. Then, one night, Pharaoh had 2 strange dreams. He saw 7 fat cows being eaten by 7 thin cows. In the second dream, 7 healthy heads of grain were swallowed by 7 thin, dried-up heads. Pharaoh was troubled. He called all his wise men, but no one could explain the dreams. Then the cupbearer remembered Joseph. "When I was in prison, a young Hebrew man told me the meaning of my dream." Everything happened just as he said. Pharaoh immediately sent for Joseph. He was brought from the prison, washed, and given clean clothes. "I heard you can interpret dreams," Pharaoh said. Joseph answered, "I cannot, but God can." Pharaoh told Joseph his dreams, and Joseph explained, "The two dreams have the same meaning. There will be 7 years of plenty, followed by 7 years of famine. God is warning Pharaoh so he can prepare." Pharaoh was amazed. "What should we do?" he asked. Joseph said, "Store extra food during the good years, so there will be enough during the famine." Pharaoh was impressed. "Who is wiser than this man? God is with him." He made Joseph governor of Egypt, second only to Pharaoh. He gave Joseph a royal robe, a gold chain, and a chariot. Joseph was no longer a slave, he was a ruler. The 7 good years came, and Joseph stored grain in great storehouses. Then the famine began. People from all over came to Egypt to buy food, including Joseph's own brothers. They did not know they were about to meet their lost brother. Joseph's story was not over yet. Chapter 18. A Hidden Identity. The famine spread across the land, reaching even Canaan, where Joseph's father, Jacob, and his family lived. They had no food left. So Jacob told his sons, "Go to Egypt and buy grain so we may survive." Joseph's brothers traveled to Egypt. When they arrived, they were taken to the governor, who controlled all the food. They bowed down before him, not knowing he was their lost brother. Joseph recognized them immediately, but they did not recognize him. Joseph remembered his dreams from long ago. His brothers were bowing before him. But instead of revealing himself, he decided to test them. "Where do you come from?" Joseph asked. "From Canaan," they answered. "We are 10 brothers. The youngest, Benjamin, is at home, and 1 brother is no longer with us." Joseph spoke harshly. "You are spies." "No, my lord," they pleaded. "We are honest men." Joseph tested them by keeping Simeon in prison and sending the others back to Canaan with grain. But he told them, "Do not return unless you bring your youngest brother." When they returned home, Jacob was afraid. "I have already lost Joseph, and now you want to take Benjamin? If something happens to him, I will die of sorrow." But the famine grew worse. Finally, Jacob allowed Benjamin to go with his brothers back to Egypt. This time, when Joseph saw Benjamin, he had to hold back his tears. He prepared a feast for them and gave Benjamin 5 times more food than the others. Still, he was not ready to reveal himself. Instead, he placed his silver cup in Benjamin's sack and accused them of stealing. His brothers were terrified. They begged Joseph, "Please do not take Benjamin. Our father will not survive without him." Joseph saw their changed hearts. He could no longer hide the truth. The time had come to reveal his identity. Chapter 19. A Tearful Reunion. Joseph could no longer hold back his emotions. Seeing his brothers' changed hearts and their love for Benjamin, he knew it was time. He sent all the Egyptian servants out of the room. Then he wept loudly and said, "I am Joseph. Is my father still alive?" His brothers were shocked and could not say a word. "Come closer," Joseph said. "Do not be afraid." You sold me into slavery, but God sent me ahead to save lives. There have been 2 years of famine, and there will be 5 more. God put me here so that you and our family would survive." Tears filled their eyes as they realized God had turned their evil into good. Joseph hugged Benjamin and wept. Then he kissed each of his brothers and forgave them. "Go back to Canaan," Joseph told them. "Tell our father Jacob that I am alive. Bring him here to Egypt, and I will take care of all of you." Pharaoh heard about Joseph's brothers and was pleased. He sent wagons to bring Jacob and all their families to Egypt. When Jacob heard that Joseph was alive, he could not believe. But when he saw the wagons, his heart was filled with joy. "My son Joseph is alive. I must go and see him before I die," Jacob said. With great excitement, Jacob and his entire family left Canaan and traveled to Egypt. The family was finally reunited. God had been faithful all along. Chapter 20. A new home in a foreign land. Jacob and his family set out on a long journey to Egypt. He was old, but his heart was full of joy. His son Joseph was alive. On the way, Jacob stopped at Beersheba to offer sacrifices to God. That night, God spoke to him in a vision. "Jacob, do not be afraid to go to Egypt. I will go with you, and I will bring you back again." Jacob's heart was at peace. He knew God would be with him. When they arrived in Egypt, Joseph rode out in his chariot to meet his father. The moment he saw Jacob, he ran to him and wept for a long time. Jacob held his son and said, "Now I can die in peace, for I have seen your face and know that you are alive." Joseph brought his family before Pharaoh. The king welcomed them and gave them the land of Goshen, a fertile place where they could live and raise their animals. Jacob and his sons settled in Egypt. They prospered, and their families grew in number. Before Jacob died, he gathered his sons and blessed each one. He reminded them of God's promises and told them that one day their descendants would return to Canaan. After blessing them, Jacob took his last breath and died peacefully. Joseph and his brothers carried their father back to Canaan and buried him in the family tomb, as he had wished. Though Jacob's journey had ended, God's promise was still alive. Chapter 21. A lasting promise. After Jacob's death, Joseph's brothers were afraid. What if Joseph still hates us? What if he punishes us for what we did to him? They whispered among themselves. So they sent a message to Joseph, saying, "Our father told us to ask for your forgiveness. Please forgive us for the wrong we did to you." When Joseph read the message, he wept. He called his brothers and said, "Do not be afraid. Am I in the place of God? You meant evil against me, but God turned it for good, so that many lives could be saved." Then Joseph spoke kindly to them and promised, "I will take care of you and your families." His brothers were no longer afraid, for they saw that Joseph's love for them was real. Joseph lived for many more years and saw his grandchildren grow. Before he died, he gathered his family and said, "One day, God will take you out of Egypt and bring you back to Canaan, the land he promised to our fathers." Then Joseph made them promise, "When God brings you back, take my bones with you." Joseph took his last breath, and the people of Egypt mourned for him. They placed his body in a coffin, waiting for the day when his family would return to Canaan. Even in death, Joseph trusted in God's promise. This was not the end of the story. God was preparing something even greater.